Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind Movement Health podcast. I'm excited to have a special guest on the show today. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Kate.
Well, as we were just talking about off air, being a nutritionist myself, a Pilates instructor, totally into that sort of health and wellness field, I'm excited about our conversation today. And I also think it's a really important topic because as we age, and move through, our 20s, 30s, and beyond, our nutrition and fitness does need to change to sort of reflect that aging. But most of the time, most of us don't know what we should be changing and why we should be changing, which is why I wanted to have you come on the show.
Well, great. I'm excited to dig in with you and excited to be able to share for your listeners.
Amazing. Now, before we dive in, can you just, give a little brief introduction about who you are?
100%. I'd be happy to. So again, my name is Ben Brown. I have an online nutrition and fitness coaching business called Body Systems, and I have been in the health and fitness space for over 20 years now. Definitely dating myself a bit, but I'm from Minnesota, obviously in the USA, and I grew up, grew up playing sports, but I was experiencing a myriad of kind of gastrointestinal issues throughout my high school years that conventional medicine couldn't really figure out. And so very quickly I realized that like my nutrition and my lifestyle and my stress management, all of those things played a role in how I was feeling and the health of my digestion. And so I kind of had to take it upon myself to, over the years of going to college and then graduate school and then getting a second, master's degree, of really continuing to explore the foundation of like holistic medicine and health and nutrition and supplementation in order to heal myself. And by virtue of doing that, developed what I believe somewhat unique skill set in terms of being able to leverage all of those tools and skills to then be able to help other people. And all of that ended up, leading to what I had been dealing with was a bacterial infection called H. pylori that plagued me for years and years and years. And it really spoke to just sort of the conventional medicine approach. And obviously there's a lot of benefits to conventional medicine, but in the context of what I was dealing with, all I was left with was medication after medication and procedure after procedure, none of which could help me diagnose or clarify what was going on. And, you know, the positives from that was realizing there's a whole nother world of our obviously our lifestyle and our heal and our nutrition and what now is this holistic approach. And that's part of why I call my company Body Systems, is because everything is integrated together. And we have this feed forward cycle where everything is synergistic and symbiotic to the degree that no one thing in our body acts in isolation. And I believe that's how we need to approach our nutrition, our exercise, our supplementation, our lifestyle, our community, and on and on.
Mm. Well, that's why I wanted to have you come on the show because I'm of a sort of very similar philosophy. Calling the show Mind Movement Health was around that everything is interconnected. Your body and your mind, it's not just one thing. Everything reflects the other when it comes to our health, and drawing it, integrating it together, you're going to get better results if we can, look at that flow on effect and again, get to that root cause. So, today I've got you on the show because we're going to talk about aging and how our body changes and how sometimes our nutrition and our fitness needs to change as we age. So, where can we start when it comes to our nutrition? What happens to our body that sometimes means that we need to change what we're eating as we age?
Well, all of this starts from building a solid foundation of nutrition and exercise behaviors as early on in our life as we possibly can. Unfortunately, my observation, and I think we can agree probably based on just, Western civilization is that all of that lends itself to poor eating behaviors and lack of physical activity to the degree that by the time we're in our 30s, 40s, and 50s and beyond, all of a sudden, it's not all of the sudden, but we're in a position where we're really feeling the effects of a whole life of poor nutrition and exercise behaviors. So I'll always preface by saying we want to be as proactive as possible. We want to be building healthy nutrition and exercise behaviors as early on as possible so that, right, we can offset the factors that become present as we age. And typically, what we see is we see declining lean muscle tissue after the age of 30. For a lot of people, they never have much lean muscle tissue to begin with. But, if we consider that if we're losing lean muscle mass due to inactivity, due to lack of resistance training as we age, but most people aren't losing weight as they age, they're actually gaining weight. So we're replacing that lean muscle tissue with body fat and building more body fat on top of that. Well, that becomes a recipe for disaster, right? And so, the kind of foundational pillars that we need to consider here are obviously our overall calorie intake, our overall movement, the amount of lean muscle tissue that we have and that I've been alluding to say nothing of, our sleep routine and recoverability, recovery behaviors, and then just overall lifestyle. And I think community plays a big role in that. But you tell me where specifically you want to go from here, and I'm happy to dive in.
Well, we want to cover all of it if we can. We'd probably need, a whole week to get through it. But I
Right.
think if we look at maybe just some of the basic nutrition principles, I think that maybe as women start to get a little bit older, what they should be focusing on. I know, coming, doing my training in the early 2000s, there was always this big push about going low fat and high carb. And now we have completely, flipped that around and it's don't be scared of fat and, really amp up that protein. But I think there's a lot of women out there unsure how much protein they should be eating in relation to carbs and fat. And, if they are trying to lose weight and balance their calories, where do they get their bang for their buck?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll tell you what my observations have been that I don't hear enough people talking about. At the end of the day, we have to acknowledge the laws of thermodynamics reign supreme, meaning calories matter, right? They matter more than anything else. And yes, like food quality matters, and we want to eat good quality, nutritionally dense food. Of course, but oftentimes we just don't realize, especially if you have, if you're listening to this and your objective is like, I want to lose body fat. I want to look better in my swimsuit. I want to feel more confident. I want to have more muscle definition, right? Well, then the question becomes, how am I effectively managing my calorie intake day in and day out? And this is accomplished both through what we consume as well as what we expend. And there's a couple components to that, but where I'll start with that, Kate, is first off around what we consume, because we're hearing ad nauseum around you need to eat enough protein, you need to eat enough protein, and that is true. Like we absolutely need to be getting enough protein to support what's called muscle protein synthesis. And so for most of us, this is multiple feedings throughout the day of uh, you know, for women, probably 25 or 30 grams of protein per meal. 3 to 4 times a day is generally probably an appropriate amount. Typically, if we were to say in terms of, um, grams, typically I'll say maybe around 0.75 to 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. Now, you guys work in kilograms over there, and I'm not sure I can do the conversion.
It's
Let's see,
2.2 pounds,
one,
yeah,
one point,
to a kilo.
so
So it's usually around 1.5 grams to
1.5
1.6
grams.
grams.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1.5 grams per kilogram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. And I do think that's important because if someone has a lot of body fat to lose, well, it could be an excessive amount of protein, especially relative to maybe what they're currently consuming. So, okay, you're going to hear that everywhere. And I don't, I don't want to regurgitate that same stuff through this conversation. Like that's understood. So you need to be doing your diligence to figuring out how to build that out throughout the day, typically in even portions. Like I said, somewhere around 30 grams of protein multiple times per day. Now, here's the thing that a lot of people are missing. And it's like you alluded to, the conversation around carbohydrates and fats and whereby, you know, um, fats were fats were looked at as bad, and now carbs are looked at as bad, and we can agree neither is bad. They're both contribute to our calorie intake. However, what I think a lot of people are missing the boat on is yes, we do want healthy fats in our diet. Um, so much so that we don't need to relegate ourselves to this woefully low fat diet, right? Like in the 80s and 90s. Um, but now we're in a position where it's almost flipped on its head, where people are justifying over consuming fats because they are quote unquote healthy. And this is problematic from a calorie standpoint. And so I'll give you an example. Um, one of my uh, one of my acquaintances, she's a busy mom. She posted on Instagram this morning, and she posted her breakfast, which was like a piece of toast, avocado toast, and she made the avocado with. She did a couple whole eggs. She did avocado. She did some olive oil, and on a piece of toast. Like, okay, that's seemingly a quote unquote healthy breakfast, right? But what we often, and I'm not saying it's not, but what I am saying is we have to be aware of how quickly and easily these calories from fat add up. Avocado is a lot of fat. Egg yolks are a lot of fat. Olive oil is a lot of fat. And so when you couple all of those things together in one meal, that could easily be 20 to 30 plus grams of fat at a given meal, which, you take that 30 grams times 9 calories per gram, and all of a sudden we're at almost 300 calories just from dietary fat for that one seemingly small meal. And what I'm seeing consistently with clients um, and colleagues is that this dietary fat, whether it's from animal proteins, whether it's from, oils, whether it's from dairy, this stuff just really, really adds up well above and beyond what our calorie needs are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the preface, as you said. If you are trying to lose weight, calories do matter. And this is where we really need to have a bit of a reflection and look at our calorie intake overall.
Yeah, because very rarely, and one of the conversations around like avoiding carbohydrates justifiably is around avoiding overly refined, processed, hyper palatable foods. We think about cookies and cakes and chips and crackers and all of these very processed foods, right? And while they often are dense in, and chips is a good example, while they often are dense in carbohydrates, they're also very dense in fat, right? Usually in oils, butter, margarine, it's a butter, vegetable oil, soy oils, whatever that looks like. And so it's not necessarily the quote unquote carbs that are bad. It's just that they are extremely calorically dense. And so if anything's, if you guys are taking anything away from this, it really would be to be cognizant of, if you are eating healthy fats, like, okay, beyond a certain point, it ceases to be healthy if we're consuming far above and beyond what we need.
Mm. And I think that's where, a lot of the manufacturers have become a little bit clever with that, and they've started making, like seaweed chips and,
Mm,
like, lentil chips and things like that, trying to appeal to people that, hey, we're not making it from, say, potatoes, which you may be scared of in that sense of carbohydrate. It's from a healthy food, but it's still cooked, as you said, in oil and fat and has a higher caloric intake and maybe nutritionally compared to what you're taking in calorie wise, nutrition wise,
that's
it
right.
might not be your best option.
And conversely, there is we just have this very unjustified conventional wisdom around foods because you mentioned potatoes, but potatoes are perhaps one of the healthiest foods that we can consume by virtue of the fact that they are very nutritionally dense. They're very low calorie for the volume, right? So you can eat a lot of potato for a very low amount of calories for the amount that you get, right? And they are very satiating, meaning they keep us full for a very long period of time. In fact, according to research that's been done, potatoes, like white potatoes as an example, are among the most satiating foods that you can consume. And I'll have you think about it for a second. It's like, think about eating a plain baked potato, right? It's like you can't eat more than one baked potato because you'd just be stuffed unless you put cheese and sour cream and butter and bacon and all the good stuff on it, right? But then, of course, it's going to significantly ramp up the the palatability and your ability to consume and of course the caloric intake. So there's nothing wrong with white rice or potatoes or the white starches, so to speak. But again, it just becomes like, are we clear and aware of where everything is coming, like where all the calories are coming in?
Mm. And that's where I think sometimes it is good when people start looking at their macros to see where the calories are coming from as a learning point. And then
Yeah.
once you learn those basics, you don't want to be stuck in having to weigh foods and, find out that stuff. But once you educate yourself on that information, then you then can make better choices and not have to do that later on.
It's an invaluable learning tool, 100%. And whether someone decides to use it in perpetuity or whether they just want to use it in short periods to quote unquote audit themselves, it's the same way we would look at, our house expenses and finances and, be responsible for those. It's the same reason a responsible adult would audit their nutrition. So we know unequivocally, objectively, how things are adding up so that we can make informed decisions around where to make changes, right? And once you're equipped with that, well, then you have autonomy and you're empowered to then be able to say, I'm choosing to eat more potatoes, or I'm choosing to eat more avocado, or I'm choosing to eat more cookies and chips because I know how it fits in with the grand scheme of things, and my caloric allowance, if you will, versus feeling like I just can't eat those things because they're bad for me or because they're fattening or some of this, again, that sort of the conventional wisdom that doesn't make sense.
Mm. And I want to segue across. We were just mentioning before about that sort of loss of muscle mass as we age. What are some of the things that women should be thinking about as they start to age when it comes to either maintaining the muscle mass they have or even trying to build on that muscle mass so that they don't lose it?
Yeah, well, so we know that muscle is the largest organ in the body, and muscle's an endocrine organ, meaning muscle has the ability to influence all other chemical mechanisms in the body because muscle produces chemical signals called myokines. And these are basically chemical messengers that can influence other tissues that are connected to it, other cells in the body, and other organs in the body, which is really a fantastic attribute of using muscle mass. And that's why we need enough muscle mass and we need to use our muscles so that we can signal other hormones in the body to function the way that they're supposed to. And when I say other organs, that means that we can influence our liver to uptake more glucose. We can improve our ability to absorb sugar from the blood, right? So we can do better with our blood sugar handling mechanism. We can signal BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, in the brain, so we can secrete more feel-good hormones. We can influence our gut health positively. So everything associated with having more muscle and using more muscle lends itself to this anti-inflammatory response. Conversely, is where we have more body fat, more adipocytes. Well, adipocytes or having more body fat also is a metabolically active organ, but it's very pro-inflammatory. And so it's counteracting everything that I just explained about the benefits of having more lean muscle mass. And so hopefully that sets the stage here around why you would want to have more muscle. Now, let's talk about how to get more muscle. Well, one is to make sure that we're being physically active enough to build it and never lose it in the first place, like I talked about initially. And the way that we build lean muscle mass is through some semblance of resistance training, meaning, we need to, as we're growing up, walk and run and play and hang and jump and, lift things and carry things and do all of those primal movement patterns. And if you grew up playing sports, that contributes to it, and just activities of daily living and riding your bike and gardening and, carrying the kids and all of that kind of stuff. But here's the thing is we have to continue doing that as we age and actually build that structure into our day to day, because our westernized and modern day lifestyles are such that we're not required to lift and carry and push and pull and walk and right do all of the things that our ancestors used to have to do just to survive, which means we have to find ways to apply resistance to the body. Pilates, strength training, um, some form of resistance training classes classically would be in a gym, lifting or at home, but lifting weights and challenging the muscles to adapt by applying a certain amount of stimulus. And this needs to happen in a way where you're stimulating this process, what's called muscle protein synthesis. And that's what I talked about, getting enough protein frequently throughout the day as well. But we need to stimulate muscle protein synthesis multiple times, um, you know, throughout the day, throughout the week, through what we eat, as well as how we apply the resistance to the body.
Mm. And I will just preface by saying anybody that is listening in that does do Pilates, Pilates can be a form of strength training, but we need to be adding in progressive load. And there are a
100%.
lot of Pilates classes out there that focus on mobility or keep you at the same weights. If you're not progressively adding that load in and increasing that load, then you're not going to be building more muscle mass. So, that goes across the board for any type of resistance training. But, there's a lot of talk out there about whether or not Pilates is strength training. And I think it really depends on your instructor, and it depends on the way your class is structured too. So I do want to
Yeah,
caveat that.
and I couldn't possibly agree with you more. You mentioned doing Pilates and I was being respectful, but fundamentally, from a best practices, like we need to be lifting weights in some way, shape, or form. That's going to be the fastest way to apply the stimulus that's going to help the body and the muscles adapt. And we need to do it consistently enough through, like you said, progressive overload, meaning we're continuing to challenge the stimulus either through lifting more weight, doing the same weight for more reps, changing the tempo or the time under tension. So the amount of time that the muscle's working, through the different ranges of motion that the muscles are working, through different exercises, and some combination of all of these things over and over and over again, and continue to apply. And that is what is going to offset the typical aging process. Because for females, as they go through perimenopause and menopause, they stop producing estrogen, and it lends itself to them not having a much harder time building and maintaining lean muscle tissue. So the more muscle mass that you have going into menopause, the better off you're going to be from a quality of life, from a health, from a longevity, for all of the reasons that we already talked about, right? Around just having muscle mass, to say nothing of you being able to just do the things that you want to do in the later years of life. And it's not that you can't still put on muscle mass, you can, but it becomes significantly more challenging because of the hormonal decline that happens. And so, that's just, we have to be cognizant of that.
100%. And that's where, I come across even in my own practice that a lot of people are like, but I don't like going to the gym and I don't like lifting weights, and I'm like, I understand that you don't like that, but it is trying to find, whether or not you are working with kettlebells or, you are using machines at the gym or you're using free weights or, resistance bands. It's finding something that works for you, but you do need to do it, like, in some shape or form, wherever you can find your joy and your people, even if it's in a class setting,
Yeah.
getting together with your best friend or putting on a home workout, whatever you prefer. It's something that we all need to be adding in regularly, multiple times a week.
Yeah, it's it's almost like yeah, I agree. You have to find the way that works for you, but you also have to acknowledge our lifestyle and the lifestyle that we want to live is such that there's certain factors that we can't navigate around. And the resistance training is one of those. And so my observation is that the more you commit to doing it, the more you find the benefit from the strength training, the better you feel, the more confident you become, right? The more intrinsically motivated you are to continue to do those behaviors to the degree that it no longer feels like a chore, but actually feels like something that you enjoy doing because you have now made a direct correlation to the benefits that it allows you. You can do more with the kids or the grandkids. You're more physically capable, you're more empowered, right, to be able to do the things that many of your friends can't do. And and so it just again it becomes like this feed forward cycle where you want to
Mm.
do more and more and more and continue to improve year after year.
Mm. And often I think, a reflection of that is people have less pain. Maybe they've got a lot of lower back pain, or it might be hip pain or knee pain. And once they actually start adding in that resistance work, a lot of that will disappear because of the increase in the muscle mass. And, especially for women too, increasing our bone density in that as well. So, I think even the reduction in pain is a big sort of bonus of that too.
It's funny because a lot of times we are told and we're kind of led to believe that if something hurts, we shouldn't do it, right? So if we're doing some strength training exercises and your shoulder hurts, or your elbow hurts or something like that, then maybe your doctor will say, well, don't do that then. But, there's really this understanding that's like, well, you know, if I don't use it, I'm going to lose it, right? And in which case, we just need to figure out how to use the muscles appropriately through different ranges of motion in a way where, maybe it does hurt a little bit, but also maybe by virtue of you doing these exercises consistently, like you said, it then stops hurting because we're starting to create more balance between the imbalanced muscle groups or the weakness, that exists or the lack of range of motion. And it's pretty reasonable that that strength training solves quite a lot of the maladies that we experience as we age.
Mm. And not just the physical ones, as we were sort of saying before, it's going to help reduce the risk of diabetes, of balancing blood sugar, all of these types of things that come in that have become, quite a common, if you speak to a lot of people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, diabetes, type 2 diabetes is, very prevalent now. It's very common. People don't go, oh, you've got diabetes. It's like, oh, yeah, you've got diabetes. Yeah. Well, we know lots of people. So I think, again, sort of seeing that reflection of that strength training into preventing disease is a big point too.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, let's move on a little bit about sort of just daily habits people can sort of start to adopt and look at as their age, and some of the ones that maybe are more supportive for our body.
Daily habits that are supportive for our body. Well, we talked about strength training. So if you can apply, some form of resistance training at least 2 days a week, but better would be 3 or 4 days a week in terms of creating the stimulus for the body to adapt. But I am always a believer of like start where you can and let's build from there and make it realistic. Daily movement is a non-negotiable. And that means some form of structured motion multiple times per day. And usually that looks like walking, but actually making a concerted point to walk, right? To build that into your daily schedule. My preference is to walk after meals because we know very clearly that moving after meals helps improve digestion, it helps improve blood sugar regulation, it helps improve energy, helps support immune system. And one of the things, you mentioned type 2 diabetes, but one of the things that we know about daily movement, especially moderate levels of intensity. So this would be more like a hike. This might be actually getting on the treadmill and walking on an incline. This could be, riding your bike. This could be weightlifting. This could be doing another piece of cardio equipment or a class or something like that. But some sort of moderate intensity physical activity creates a physiological response such that it actually makes blood glucose a lot easier to go into the cells. And it's one of the things that is so magical, legitimately so powerful about moving your body multiple times in multiple ways throughout the day, right? To the degree that we can, we can, I mean, we, if you're type 2 diabetic, you can resolve for the most part the blood sugar imbalances that you're experiencing by virtue of course, eating healthier foods but also improving your blood sugar mechanism. And this is how you do that. And so it's moving multiple times throughout the day. For starters, it's just like, hey, how can I accumulate enough steps throughout the day? Right. And I always encourage people to just simply identify, just like the calories, it's like, where are we starting from? Get a cheap tracker, a cheap Fitbit or pedometer, or use your Apple Watch or use your phone. And let's just observe, how many steps are we currently getting in? Oh, I'm getting in 4,000. Okay, well, could we do 50% more? Right? Could I make it a goal to shoot for 6,000 steps per day and just start there and see what you need to do to accumulate that? And like I said, Kate, I mean, my preference is if you can accumulate at least 10 to 15 minutes after each meal, well, right there, we've got at least 45 minutes accumulated throughout the day. That's probably going to be the equivalent of 4 to 5,000 steps. And then you can build on top of that. So that's a no-brainer, usually low level barrier, low barrier or resistance to get started there. One of the things I'm a big fan of is having a structured kind of sleep and wake routine, because we tend to waste too much time at night doing things that aren't advantageous. So staying up too late, watching television, scrolling on our phone, staring at blue light in the hours where we should be sleeping. And that ends up contributing to making it harder to wake up in the morning, having dysregulated blood sugar and stress hormones, lending itself to more cravings, lack of willpower and discipline, eating things that we shouldn't be eating. And, the list goes, less likely to exercise in the morning. The list goes on and on. So if we can just simply create some structure and kind of bookend the day with a dedicated sleep routine, where we're turning off the screens early enough, stop eating early enough so we can get to bed on time, get good quality sleep, wake up early enough to justify getting some movement in, getting organized for the day, especially if you're listening and you have kids. We all know the importance of that, of having some kind of personal time before you got to start doing your parental duties. And then it really makes everything else that you build throughout the day and commit to throughout the day that much easier to execute on.
Mm. Well, and as you said, those, habits, they're simple in that we've all got access to them. They don't cost money. They're just going back to some of those basics that we've all heard about that don't seem sort of super exciting. But when you dial those ones in, they have huge flow-on effects to your energy, to your performance, to your, brain capabilities, physical capabilities, and so on.
Well, think about what I mean, really, think about what we've talked about so far already in terms of, we talked about just accumulating enough movement through steps throughout the day. We talked about a minimum of 2 days a week of some modest strength training. We talked about having a dedicated sleep and wake routine. We talked about getting, 30 plus grams of protein at each of your meals. We talked about actually doing your diligence and maybe tracking your calories for a period of time so that you can be aware and be responsible for your intake. And by the way, by virtue of doing that, you're going to consistently make better decisions because you have built-in accountability. And we know through the laws of behavioral psychology, just by fear of the fact that you're actually writing it down and you're essentially looking in the kind of mirror around your behaviors and acknowledging those behaviors, you're going to make better decisions, which is going to help move the needle as well. We haven't talked about a fad diet. We haven't talked about shakes or shots or supplements or crazy exercise routines or intermittent fasting or anything other than the foundational components. And I don't know about you, but I'm assuming you'd agree. If someone did nothing but what we already discussed, which in all fairness, I mean, for a lot of people, that is a lot, would feel like a lot. But if someone did nothing but those things, I could guarantee in a month, 2 months, 6 months, they would see profound changes to their energy, to their physique, to their overall health, to their confidence, to their feelings of well being, to their body composition. The list goes on and on.
100%. I totally agree. But that's where I guess the psychology of that comes in that we know most people know a lot of this sort of basic knowledge, but then we've still got a population, a worldwide population generally that are overweight, that are fighting disease. So, as simple as it is, it's not as simple always to execute. And that's where, as we're sort of saying, if we can just pick one thing to focus on, or just improve, maybe your steps by, a certain amount, that can stop some of that overwhelm that sometimes comes in too.
Yeah, it's hard because we're just indoctrinated in our social media feed with the magic bullet of if you just, you need to do this or if you just did this and everyone makes it look a lot easier than it necessarily is, or like it's going to happen a lot faster, and that's just not how it works. Um, and maybe you could do some fad-based diet or exercise program to see some short-term results, but it's also not going to be you're going to have a hard time sustaining it. And I know we're both in the world of like, I would rather you take slower steps and potentially see slower progress to also be able to be in a position where you're able to maintain it a year, 2, 5 years down the road versus continuing to play this yo-yo cycling game, which what's that costing you at the end of the day in terms of time, energy, effort, money, stress, frustration? It's expensive.
That's it. Time wise and money wise, it's very expensive. Now, I want to also, we've talked about all those basics, but I also want to highlight rest because I think, especially for women, they think that they need to always be doing, their diet dialed in, their cardio, their resistance, their go, go, go. And having a rest day is almost sometimes for some women feels like they're failing because they're having a rest day. So, can you chat a little bit about the importance of rest, especially as we start to get that bit older?
Yeah, well, that's such a good point, and I'm glad you brought it up because we are only as good as our recovery, right? Our training is only as good as our recovery. Our blood sugar is only going to function as good as our ability for our hormones to be regulated. And the less that we sleep, the more dysregulation we're going to see. The more that we train to a degree, the more dysregulation that we're going to see. And we know very clearly in muscle physiology that we essentially a good example is we see this open window effect in muscle physiology. And so what happens is, we often think, especially women, think that more is better. And no, in all fairness, guys do the exact same thing. But we think, hey, if I did more cardio, if I just went out and ran more and accumulated more at a higher intensity, and I did the boot camp classes and the spin classes and the, to exhaustion, kind of barf inducing workouts, like I'm going to quote unquote burn more calories and I'm going to lose more weight. But that's not how things work. It's not how things work from a metabolism standpoint, and it's not how things work from an immune system standpoint. And what we know very clearly is for most non-athletes, so most people who aren't very well trained, which is most of us, um, above 60% of our VO2 max, which is not that much, right? 60% is zone two. That's a conversational pace, but above 60% for an extended period of time, like longer than 60 minutes, we actually see this open window, which is essentially a suppression of our immune system for hours beyond that workout window. And so we're actually become more vulnerable to pathogens and bacteria and viruses through immune suppression because we stressed our body above and beyond what it's capable of responding to. And so this is a really good example of how oftentimes less is more from an exercise standpoint, in a way where we just simply need to apply enough modest stress for the body to adapt from an exercise standpoint, and we can control the other variables from our nutrition. Put differently, is our weight is regulated through our nutrition, and our fitness and overall health is regulated through our exercise, through strength training, through cardiovascular exercise. And so understanding the relationship between those two. And then similarly, like from a metabolic standpoint, the harder you push in the gym or the lower your calorie intake is, the more your metabolism is going to push back, right? To the degree that you're going to, if you burn 500 or 1,000 calories doing your spin class or your boot camp class, that's great. But what you'll probably observe is that you're going to be a lot hungrier for the rest of the day and or the rest of the week. You're going to be a lot more lethargic. You're going to be a lot less likely to go for those walks or feel less likely to want to go for those walks. You're going to be more inclined to crave more foods. And, the list goes on and on. And so, from a recoverability standpoint, it's very important that um, we are controlling the variables. We are challenging ourselves in the gym, but we're also looking at the long-term plan. You said progressive overload, meaning whatever I did today, I want to be able to do just a modest amount more, assuming I'm challenging myself next week and next session, right? And the session after that. And if we can just modestly increase time and over time, that's what's going to create the adaptation. And by virtue of really dialing in the sleep routine, we can normalize our hormones, our thyroid function, our blood sugar regulation, so that we can make better decisions in the kitchen. We can be more mentally stable. We can be more emotionally stable. And all of that lends itself to just being more consistent. That's the name of the game.
Mm. I agree 100% with all of that. And I think also it's something, if you are going through a very maybe stressful time in your life, maybe you're caring for a loved one, maybe you've got a lot of travel going on, take these things into account as well when you are designing your workout schedule, because that's another layer of stress that your body, your immune system is having to deal with. And so that may mean during these periods, you need to dial back some of that intensity. It doesn't mean that you stop moving by any means, but it may mean reevaluating, what your workouts are. You might cut back on some of those longer runs if you're doing them and add in another resistance training session instead. So I think, looking at that and just realizing that your training, although we're trying to add in progressive overload and build strength and muscle, over time, there may be some bumps in the road. It doesn't always just go on a linear sort of curve. It may be up and down when it comes to getting those gains.
We um, we talk about the concept of nutrition seasons in our coaching practice. And it's really framing, it's kind of starting wide, 30,000 foot view, and framing almost like a year-long approach. And then first and foremost is highlighting the times of the year where we know we're going to have to be very cognizant around how much stress we're putting on your plate. The holidays, perhaps, or spring break with the kids, or summer vacation, or some family travel, and to say nothing of the invariable things that are going to fall into place. Maybe it's a sick family member or friend, or some busy with work, or something like that. And so we're going to have plenty of these times basically planted in throughout the year that we do need to set realistic expectations around. And one of the things that I think that people struggle with the most is the expectation, that sort of the self expectation, and unrealistic if at that, that they should be able to keep grinding through all of these different seasons. And like you alluded to, that's not the way that the body works. That's not what we need to do to be successful. Instead, if we simply framed things differently and we highlighted, listen, here's the times where we can double down and really put more intentional time, effort, energy into training and nutrition and being more diligent about those things, which is a requisite if we're, trying to make significant progress. But by doing that, we also give ourselves permission to be more modest or take more liberties or have more flexibility and freedom during those seasons where we're challenged to be as consistent as we could be. And that, just from a stress standpoint, really is a huge relief, right? Because then we don't have to, like, I'm supposed to be training 4 days a week, but I simply do not have time in the calendar to be able to do that. Well, no problem. Let's just train 2 days a week. Let's focus on steps. Let's, have some guardrails in place around your nutrition. Let's make sure you're optimizing your sleep routine. Let's control for alcohol and we'll maintain, right, during this season so that when we do go into the next kind of grind season, you'll be refreshed and ready and psychologically ready to put the pedal to the metal. And that's how we maintain consistency. That's how we physiologically and metabolically set the stage for long-term success too, so that it doesn't ever have to be this long, drawn out, constant battle of white knuckling it, which invariably is why most people fail.
Mm. And I mean, that's where it comes back to these principles just becoming daily habits. It's just your lifestyle. It's not something you're trying, it's not a program. It just becomes everyday life. And these principles really hold true.
They do. They do. And we typically call them our kind of foundational anchors. So we have our floors and our ceilings, and our floors are daily non-negotiables, right? This is our baseline levels of behaviors, our, baseline daily steps, water intake, minimal, maybe how many meals per day we get, the amount of protein at each of those, like whatever the things, even during the most stressful times, we know we can hit. That's part of our daily routine. But then we also have the ceilings. On our best days, right, we know we could do better with the amount of protein or calorie control or tracking every morsel of food or hitting, more time in the gym or whatever that looks like. And so that gives us a good opportunity and perspective around setting those boundaries.
Mm. And, we've covered a lot of areas today, sort of, in healthy aging. But is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to cover before we wrap up?
Oh, I think not that I can think of top of mind. I mean, I think that the most important considerations are what you can realistically commit to, understanding that you need to push yourself through some level of discomfort here. Like, we do talk about quote unquote what's realistic for you, but also, you need to be challenged to do, if you're not where you want to be, then you need to challenge yourself to do more than what you're currently doing within the context of what we already established. It doesn't mean if you're already training 4 days a week to now all of a sudden do 5 or 6 days a week. It means maybe you need to challenge yourself to actually get to bed on time. Or maybe you need to challenge yourself to stop saying yes to so many things and start saying no so that you can say yes to your sleep routine and to your recoverability, or to planning out your meals more effectively. And so, what I would challenge is just a bit of the mental shift around if you are in a position where you're quote unquote feeling like you're doing everything right, but you're not seeing change, then we're definitely missing something along the way. And you've got to be brutally honest with yourself around not just trying to pop over and look for the next thing to do, but actually, um, being objective about, well, are we clear on what we're actually currently doing, right? If you're quote unquote eating healthy, but you're not seeing weight change and you're not tracking your calorie intake, then maybe you need to commit to actually tracking your calorie intake for a couple weeks so that we can actually know,
Mm.
right? And that's just, one of many examples.
Well, and as you said, I don't think people like being uncomfortable. We do live in a world where we make ourselves as comfortable as possible. We turn the aircon on, we have recliner
Yeah.
chairs. We don't have to do a lot of things anymore. So I think when it comes to doing something that is uncomfortable or feels like a barrier, it's harder for a lot of people to kind of realize that that's part of the process. So I think, being okay with that and knowing that you're probably going to be in some discomfort for a period of time, whether or not, it's through your resistance training while you're building that muscle and you're a bit sore after the workouts, or, you're changing your nutrition and you're having to prep a few things more and find that time, there is going to be some feeling of uncomfortableness throughout whatever changes you're making.
Yeah, and that's the mindset shift. And maybe that's the one thing that we didn't talk about that probably supersedes every single thing that was discussed, but was actually the ability to root into the discomfort that is a requisite for the change that most people want to make. And it's the fundamental understanding that it's almost learning to enjoy the discomfort and leaning into the discomfort that is always present in some way, shape, or form, right? It's I know I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to push myself through, right? A challenging workout. That is uncomfortable, but I feel great on the back end of that. So it's something that I look forward to. There's nothing comfortable about, you know, planning and preparing your meals and sticking to those meals consistently and not eating your kids' chocolate chip cookies or going out for ice cream and pizza or drinking the beers. Like, I think that would be a lot more comforting to do those things. And it's uncomfortable to not do that. But it's also the very discomfort that is challenging you to create the change that you say that you want. Having the hard conversations with family members and friends around why you're not drinking or eating the pizza or going out on Friday night or partaking in XYZ. That's uncomfortable, but it's a necessary discomfort for you to build the behaviors, tools, and skills that are going to help you consistently make those decisions, right? And so that's where when you wake up in the morning and you say, well, I don't want to get up. I want to hit the snooze. Then you need to tap into that mindset of like, it feels really hard for me to get out of bed right now, which is exactly why I'm going to get out of bed and I'm going to overcome that discomfort. And the more you do that, the more evidence you build that you are the type of person to do those hard things. And the easier and easier it becomes, and the more you move the needle and the more you move the goalposts to the degree that you'll be more and more capable to continue to see the results that you're after.
Mm. And celebrating, those small wins that you do have is important. I'll often have clients that come into class and they're like, is this exercise harder? Because it feels harder. And I'm like, yeah, of course it's harder. I said, you've gotten stronger. I said, you've gotten more mobile, you've got better balance. So I'm making it harder on you. So I think sometimes people don't realize as well, or they don't celebrate that, or remember that they have moved, from maybe having terrible back pain and not being able to walk, a kilometer to now being able to, lift 20 kilos, walk 5Ks and have a lot less pain. So I think celebrating those little wins, looking at those milestones and reflecting back can be very helpful as well.
I love it. 100%.
Now, before we wrap up, I always ask my guests if there's one piece of health advice that you could give to our listeners that after listening to this podcast, they could go out and instigate straight away. What would it be?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about a lot of stuff, but I would really I would consider through our conversation if there was one thing that really resonated with you around, I think I could do that. I think I could eat more protein. I think I could commit to strength training more consistently. I think I could commit to walking more regularly. I think I could commit to a dedicated bedtime routine. Then what I would challenge the listener to do is to actually commit to that and actually get very, very clear around what that looks like. It's not just saying, I'm going to start to get to bed earlier. It's saying, what time are you going to get to bed? I normally go to bed at 10. I'm committed and maybe writing it out. I am committed. I'm not going to try, right? I want to go to bed. I'm not, I want to go to bed. I am committed to going to bed at 9 p.m. every single night for the next 2 weeks. right? And maybe you write that every single day, and then you can check the box around it. And if you did nothing else, is just being honest around committing to that one behavior and then seeing how you respond. And you might be surprised because when you can build momentum around that, then you can start to stack some habits around it, and more things will fall into place.
Amazing. I love that because I think we all love to check a box too and have that like tick there, like,
100%.
yes, done, we've made it, we feel better. Now,
Achievement.
where can our listeners reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're on Instagram at Body Systems Coaching. Uh, I have a podcast as well. It's called The Smart Nutrition Made Simple Show. We talk about many of the similar things that we discussed today. And then I'm sure you'll have the links to all of these things down in the show notes. But my website, bodysystems.com, feel free to shoot me a message. I'd love to have a conversation and see if and how I can support you.
Amazing. Well, yes, we will link that all up in the show notes as well. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Ben. I think we've covered a lot of those principles that are really fundamental that will definitely help us and support us as we age. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Kate, thanks so much for having me, and all your listeners. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to tune in. Hope this has been helpful.